poured every ounce of love into fixing them, thinking it would save you both, and ended up being the reason they couldn't stay? Hit that like button. Subscribe if you believe that sometimes the lessons we learn from our biggest failures become the wisdom that saves others from the same fate, because what I'm about to tell you proves that losing everything can teach you what truly matters. My name is Iris. I'm 41 years old. And the day I stood in front of my first workshop teaching divorcing couples how to communicate was the day I finally understood that my marriage didn't end because I loved too little. It ended because I loved in a way that suffocated instead of supported. But before I tell you about that room full of broken relationships I helped rebuild, let me take you back to where my own story shattered, because every expert on failure starts by becoming a master of it first. I met Noah Bennett when I was 26 years old at a software company where we both worked. I was a project manager, organized and efficient, the kind of person who color-coded calendars and kept detailed spreadsheets for everything including grocery shopping. Noah was a developer, creative and spontaneous, the kind of person who solved problems in unconventional ways and forgot appointments because he'd gotten absorbed in coding. We were opposites in almost every way that mattered. Looking back, I can see how that should have been a warning. But at 26, I thought opposites attract meant we'd balance each other out. Instead, we spent 10 years trying to change each other into people we could understand. Our first year together was magical in the way new relationships always are. Noah found my organization charming. I found his spontaneity exciting. We'd laugh about our differences over dinner, teasing each other gently about mismatched socks and overly detailed itineraries. We got married 2 years after we met in a small ceremony that perfectly illustrated our fundamental incompatibility. I'd planned every detail down to the minute. Noah showed up 20 minutes late because he'd stopped to help a stranger with a flat tire. I was furious. He was confused about why I couldn't just be flexible. Our photographer captured the moment right after he arrived, me with a forced smile and tight shoulders, him with genuine confusion about what he'd done wrong. That photo should have told us everything we needed to know. But we were in love, and we believed love conquered all differences. The problem started small. Noah would forget to pay bills on time, so I took over all our finances. He'd leave dishes in the sink, so I created a chore schedule. He'd make plans without checking our calendar, so I started managing his schedule too. Each solution seemed logical at the time. I was good at organization. He wasn't. Therefore, I should handle these things. But organization slowly transformed into control, and help became criticism. By our 3rd year of marriage, I'd become the person who managed every aspect of our shared life. I planned our meals, our social calendar, our vacation itineraries down to 15-minute increments. I laid out Noah's clothes the night before important meetings because he'd once worn a shirt with a small stain. I proofread his work emails because his casual writing style made me anxious. I reminded him about his parents' birthdays, his dentist appointments, and his car maintenance schedule. And with every act of management, I'd frame it as helping. Noah, you forgot to call your mother back. Noah, you need to leave earlier or you'll be late. Noah, that's not how you load the dishwasher efficiently. Noah, let me handle this because you'll probably mess it up. I didn't see how each correction chipped away at his confidence and autonomy. I thought I was being helpful, supportive, the wife who had everything under control. Noah started withdrawing around year 5. He'd come home from work and retreat to his home office, claiming he had projects to finish. Our conversations became shorter, more functional. Did you pick up groceries? What time is dinner? I scheduled us for couples therapy next Tuesday at 6. He stopped sharing ideas with me because I'd immediately point out potential problems. He stopped making plans because I'd reorganize them into something more efficient. He stopped being spontaneous because spontaneity required a flexibility I no longer possessed. I noticed the distance but interpreted it wrong. I thought he was being lazy, disconnected, not trying hard enough in our marriage. So I tried harder to fix things, which meant more management, more correction, more instruction. I created a weekly marriage meeting where we'd review our relationship goals and areas for improvement. Noah attended these meetings with the enthusiasm of someone enduring a performance review at a job they hated. Looking back, I can see how absurd it was. But in the moment it felt necessary. I'd convinced myself that Noah needed my guidance to function, that without my constant instruction he'd fall apart. The truth was much simpler and more painful. I'd turned myself into his mother instead of his partner, and nobody wants to be married to their parents. By year 7, we were roommates who occasionally had polite conversations. The intimacy had died years earlier, suffocated by my need to control and correct. Noah had stopped trying to please me because nothing he did was ever quite right. I'd become the person who could find fault in everything, who offered criticism disguised as concern. Our 8th anniversary dinner was the beginning of the end. I'd made reservations at an upscale restaurant, planned the entire evening down to what time we'd leave and return home. Noah showed up in jeans and a casual shirt. I told him to wear business casual. The look I gave him communicated my disappointment before I said a word. "Really, Noah," I said quietly as we sat down. "I specifically said business casual. This is a nice restaurant." He looked at me with tired eyes. "Iris, does it really matter?" "Yes," I insisted. "It matters because it shows respect for the occasion and for me." He didn't argue. He just nodded and picked up his menu, the light in his eyes dimming a little more. That dinner lasted 90 minutes of stilted conversation where I corrected his ordering, his posture, and his table manners. When we got home, Noah went straight to his office and closed the door. I stood in our kitchen, feeling frustrated and misunderstood, convinced that I was the only one trying to make our marriage work. 2 weeks later, Noah asked for a divorce. He didn't yell or accuse. He just sat across from me at our kitchen table and said the words that ended everything. "Iris, I can't do this anymore." I stared at him in shock. "Can't do what?" "This," he said, gesturing between us. "Being married to someone who treats me like a project that needs constant management. I'm not your employee. I'm supposed to be your husband." I felt my defenses rise immediately. "I'm trying to help you." "You're trying to control me," he corrected gently. "Every single day you tell me what I'm doing wrong. How I should dress, how I should talk, how I should organize my life. You've turned our marriage into a dictatorship where you make all the rules and I just follow orders." "That's not fair," I protested. "I'm just organized." "You're controlling," he said, his voice sad rather than angry. "And I've lost myself trying to be the person you want me to be. I realized something yesterday. I don't even know who I am anymore outside of your expectations." That scared me enough to finally say what I should have said years ago. "I want a divorce." The next 3 months were a nightmare of lawyers, paperwork, and dividing a life we'd built together. Noah was kind throughout the entire process, which somehow made it worse. He didn't fight for assets or try to hurt me financially. He just wanted out, wanted to escape the cage I'd built around our marriage with good intentions and terrible execution. Our divorce was finalized on a Tuesday afternoon in a courthouse that smelled like old paper and regret. Noah shook my hand formally, wished me well, and walked out of my life. I went home to an apartment I'd rented after we sold our house, sat on the floor surrounded by moving boxes, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I'd done. I destroyed my marriage not through cruelty or infidelity, but through 1,000 small corrections that added up to complete rejection of who Noah actually was. I'd loved him, truly loved him, but I'd loved him wrong. The next year was dark. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to avoid the empty apartment and emptier evenings. My friends tried to help, but most of them had sided with Noah once they understood what had happened. Apparently, everyone had noticed my controlling behavior except me. I was angry at first, defensive, convinced that people just didn't understand how hard it was to be married to someone so disorganized. But late at night, alone with my thoughts, I couldn't escape the truth. Noah hadn't been the problem. He had been. 6 months after the divorce, I started therapy with a woman named Dr. Ramona Phillips who specialized in relationship patterns and attachment issues. She was direct in a way that was both painful and necessary. "Tell me about your childhood," she said during our first session. "I grew up with chaos," I admitted. "My father was an alcoholic. My mother was depressed. Nothing was ever stable or predictable." Dr. Phillips nodded knowingly. "So you learned that control equals safety." If you could manage everything, keep it all organized and predictable, then nothing bad could happen. Exactly, I said, feeling seen for the first time in years. But you took that survival mechanism from childhood and applied it to an adult relationship, she continued. You tried to control Noah because his spontaneity felt dangerous, even though it wasn't. You needed predictability so badly that you couldn't tolerate any deviation from your plans. The sessions that followed were excavations of my psyche. We dug into my fear of chaos, my need for control, my inability to tolerate uncertainty or accept that other people's ways of doing things might be just as valid as mine. Dr. Phillips introduced me to concepts like emotional regulation, healthy boundaries, and the difference between supporting someone and managing them. She gave me homework assignments that felt impossible. Go an entire day without correcting anyone. Allow someone else to make plans without input. Sit with discomfort instead of trying to fix it immediately. I failed most of these assignments initially. Decades of conditioning don't disappear in weeks. But slowly, painfully, I started to understand how my behavior had impacted Noah. I'd made him feel small, incompetent, constantly judged. I'd taken a creative, spontaneous person and tried to force him into a rigid structure that went against his nature. And I'd done it all while genuinely believing I was helping. A year into therapy, Dr. Phillips suggested I write Noah a letter. Not to send, just to process my feelings and practice accountability. I spent 2 weeks on that letter, writing and rewriting until I'd captured everything I wished I'd understood while we were still married. I apologized for treating him like a project instead of a person. I acknowledged how my need for control had suffocated his autonomy. I took responsibility for my part in our divorce without making excuses or deflecting blame. When I read the finished letter to Dr. Phillips, she was quiet for a long moment. That's real accountability, she finally said. That's growth. Around this same time, I started volunteering at a community center that offered free relationship workshops. I'd help set up chairs, distribute materials, and occasionally share my story during small group discussions. The workshop facilitator, a therapist named Xavier Cole, noticed my contributions and pulled me aside after one session. You have real insight into relationship dynamics, he said. Have you ever considered facilitating groups yourself? I laughed. I destroyed my own marriage. Why would anyone listen to my advice? Because you understand what not to do, Xavier replied. And sometimes the best teachers are the ones who've learned from their own mistakes. He offered to train me in relationship education facilitation. It was a 6-month program covering communication techniques, conflict resolution, and healthy relationship patterns. I was hesitant at first, convinced I had no business teaching others about relationships when I'd failed so spectacularly on my own. But something about the opportunity called to me. Maybe I could help others avoid my mistakes. The training was intensive and often triggering. We role-played difficult conversations, analyzed communication patterns, and studied the research on what makes relationships succeed or fail. I saw myself in every negative example. The pursuing partner who is overwhelmed with criticism. The controlling partner who can't tolerate differences. The anxious partner who manages instead of trusts. During one training session, we watched a video of a couple fighting. The wife criticized everything her husband did, offering corrections disguised as help while he sat quietly. His body language screaming defeat. I started crying in the middle of the workshop. That was me, I said to Xavier afterward. That's exactly what I did to Noah. I know, he said gently. That's why you'll be so effective at helping others. You don't just understand these patterns intellectually. You've lived them. You know what they feel like from the inside. After completing the training, I started facilitating workshops with Xavier. We focused on couples who were considering divorce, offering them tools to improve communication before making final decisions. My role was to teach about control dynamics and how good intentions can create toxic patterns. I'd share my story carefully, not to excuse my behavior but to illustrate how easy it is to fall into destructive patterns without realizing it. The first time I stood in front of a room full of struggling couples and said, I lost my marriage because I tried to control my husband instead of accepting him, something shifted inside me. Shame began transforming into purpose. My failure wasn't just a personal tragedy anymore. It was a lesson that could help others. The response was overwhelming. Couples approached me after workshops saying they'd recognized themselves in my story. Women admitted they'd been managing their husbands the way I'd managed Noah. Men shared how suffocated they felt by partners who couldn't tolerate any deviation from their expectations. And slowly, with guidance and practice, these couples started to change. They learned to communicate without criticism, to ask instead of instruct, to accept differences instead of trying to eliminate them. 2 years after my divorce, I launched my own practice called Rebuild Communication Services. I offered workshops, private coaching, and intensive retreats for couples in crisis. My specialty was helping controlling partners understand how their behavior impacted their relationships, and helping overwhelmed partners set boundaries without withdrawing completely. The business grew faster than I'd anticipated. Apparently, there was significant demand for someone who could speak honestly about control issues without judgment, someone who'd been there and came out the other side with understanding rather than bitterness. I hired 2 other therapists to help manage the workload. We developed programs specifically for different relationship challenges. One workshop focused on couples where one partner managed everything. Another addressed emotional withdrawal and stonewalling. A third helped parents navigate relationship changes after having children. Each program was built on research, but also on my lived experience of what happens when love becomes control and help becomes harm. 3 years after our divorce, I ran into Noah at a coffee shop. My heart stopped when I saw him standing in line. He looked good, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. We made eye contact across the crowded room. For a moment, I considered leaving without saying anything. But I'd spent 3 years learning to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. I waited until he got his coffee, then approached carefully. "Hi Noah," I said quietly. "Iris," he replied, surprise crossing his face. "How are you?" "I'm okay," I said. "Actually, I'm better than okay. I've been doing a lot of work on myself." He nodded, his expression cautious but not unkind. "I heard you're doing relationship coaching now. Pamela mentioned it." Pamela was his sister, someone I'd once been close to. "Yeah," I said. "Turns out destroying my own marriage qualified me to help others not make the same mistakes." It was meant as a self-deprecating joke, but Noah's face grew serious. "Iris," he said gently, "you didn't destroy our marriage alone. I withdrew instead of communicating. I let resentment build instead of setting boundaries. We both contributed to what happened." His generosity made my eyes sting with tears. "That's kind of you to say, but we both know I was the primary problem. I controlled everything and made you feel like you couldn't do anything right." Noah was quiet for a moment. "You did," he agreed. "But I also stopped fighting for my own autonomy. I became passive and let you take over instead of pushing back. Our divorce taught me that I need to speak up, to set boundaries, to not disappear into relationships with strong personalities." We talked for 20 minutes standing in that coffee shop, a conversation more honest than most we'd had during our marriage. Noah told me about his new job, his therapy journey, the ways he'd grown since our divorce. I told him about my practice, the workshops I facilitated, the satisfaction I found in helping others communicate better. Before we parted, Noah said something I'll never forget. "I'm glad you found purpose in what we went through, Iris. I really am. And for what it's worth, I think you're probably an amazing teacher now. You understand both sides, the need for control and the damage it causes. That perspective is valuable." "Thank you," I managed to say around the lump in my throat. "And Noah, I'm sorry. For all of it." "I know," he said with a sad smile. "I forgave you a long time ago. I hope you've forgiven yourself." "Hadn't, not completely. But I was working on it." Watching Noah walk away, I felt something shift. Not closure exactly, but acceptance. Our marriage had ended, but the lessons from it were helping dozens of other couples stay together. That had to count for something. Over the next year, my practice expanded to include online workshops and a podcast where I interviewed relationship experts and shared stories from couples who'd successfully navigated communication challenges. The podcast, called Loving Better After Failing Badly, became unexpectedly popular. People responded to the honesty, the willingness to discuss real failures without sugarcoating or making excuses. I interviewed divorced people who'd learned from their mistakes, married couples who'd almost divorced but found ways to reconnect, therapists who specialized in the messy realities of long-term relationships. And in every episode, I was transparent about my own failures. I didn't hide behind professional credentials or pretend I had all the answers. I shared my story as a cautionary tale and a message of hope. Yes, you can destroy a relationship with good intentions and toxic patterns. But you can also learn, grow, and use that painful knowledge to build something better, whether that's a new relationship or simply a better version of yourself. By my 5th year post-divorce, I'd facilitated workshops for over 300 couples. Many of them stayed together, implementing the communication tools and boundary-setting skills we practiced. Some still divorced, but reported doing so with more respect and less trauma than they would have otherwise. I considered both outcomes successful. My goal wasn't to save every marriage regardless of whether it should be saved. My goal was to help people communicate honestly, understand their patterns, and make conscious choices rather than defaulting to destructive behaviors. Then I got an email that stopped me cold. It was from Noah. The subject line read, "An idea you might hate or love." I opened it with trembling hands. "Iris," he wrote, "I've been following your work from a distance and I'm impressed by what you've built. I'm reaching out with a proposal that might be completely inappropriate or potentially valuable. I'm not sure which. I've started dating someone seriously. Her name is Brielle and she's wonderful. But we've been having communication issues that feel familiar. She's organized and likes control. I'm spontaneous and resist structure. Sounds familiar. We're trying not to repeat the mistakes we've both made in previous relationships. Would you be willing to do a few coaching sessions with us? I understand if that's too weird or painful. But you understand these dynamics better than anyone, and I trust you." Me no. Noah. I stared at that email for an hour, my emotions swinging between multiple extremes. Part of me wanted to decline immediately. Coaching my ex-husband and his new girlfriend felt like professional suicide and personal torture. But another part of me, the part that had spent 5 years learning to sit with discomfort and serve others, knew this was exactly the kind of challenge that would test everything I'd learned. I responded that evening, "Noah, thank you for thinking of me. I'm willing to do this if Brielle is comfortable with it and if we establish clear boundaries. This would be purely professional coaching focused on communication patterns, not processing our past relationship. If everyone agrees to those terms, I'm in." We scheduled our first session for 2 weeks later. I was terrified, but I'd learned that growth lived on the other side of terror, and I'd built a career on walking toward discomfort rather than away from it. Noah and Brielle arrived at my office exactly on time. Brielle was warm and nervous, shaking my hand with obvious anxiety about the situation. "Thank you for doing this," she said immediately. "I know this must be incredibly strange for you." "It is," I admitted. "But I've learned that strange situations often teach the most valuable lessons. Let's talk about what you're struggling with." Over the next hour, they described their relationship patterns. Brielle would create detailed plans for everything. Noah would feel suffocated and withdraw. She'd interpret his withdrawal as lack of interest and increase her controlling behavior. He'd retreat further. The cycle was painfully familiar. I could see younger versions of Noah and me in their dynamic, trapped in the same dance that had destroyed our marriage. But this time I was on the outside. This time I could help. I spent 6 sessions working with them on communication skills, boundary setting, and accepting fundamental differences without trying to change each other. Brielle learned to recognize when her organization crossed into control. Noah learned to speak up earlier before resentment built. They practiced having difficult conversations without criticism or withdrawal. By our final session, they'd transformed how they related to each other. On our last day together, Brielle hugged me goodbye with tears in her eyes. "You saved us," she said. "We were headed exactly where you and Noah ended up. But now we have tools to catch ourselves before patterns become problems." I looked at Noah, who was watching this interaction with a gentle smile. You did this yourselves, I said. I just showed you the map. You had to walk the path. After they left, I sat in my office feeling something I hadn't expected. Helping Noah build a healthier relationship with someone else didn't hurt the way I'd feared it would. It felt like coming full circle, like transforming my biggest failure into tangible good for people I cared about. That evening, I updated my website with a new section about my coaching philosophy. I wrote honestly about my divorce, the lessons I'd learned, and my belief that relationship failures don't define us unless we refuse to learn from them. I included testimonials from couples I'd worked with, including a quote from Noah and Brielle that they'd given me permission to share. Working with Iris was transformative, Brielle had written. She understood our patterns because she'd lived them. Her honesty about her own mistakes made it safe for us to acknowledge ours. Within a week, that testimonial had been shared across social media. My inbox filled with requests from couples who wanted coaching from someone who'd failed publicly and learned genuinely. 6 months later, I published a book called Loving Without Control, Building Relationships Based on Acceptance Instead of Management. It combined research on relationship dynamics with my personal story and practical tools for couples struggling with control issues. The book became a modest bestseller in the relationship self-help category. I did interviews, appeared on podcasts, and spoke at conferences about the damage controlling behavior causes and how to change it. In every appearance, I was transparent about my failures. I didn't position myself as an expert who had it all figured out. I positioned myself as someone who'd destroyed something precious and spent years learning how to never do it again. Today, 7 years after my divorce, I run a thriving practice helping hundreds of couples communicate better. I've trained other facilitators in my methods. I've developed online courses reaching thousands of people worldwide. And I've finally forgiven myself for the ways I damaged Noah during our marriage. Not because I've forgotten or minimized what I did, but because I've spent 7 years turning that failure into wisdom that serves others. My marriage ended because I tried to control instead of accept, instruct instead of support, manage instead of trust. Those failures taught me lessons I could never have learned any other way. And now, every couple I help stay together, every workshop where someone has that aha moment recognizing their own controlling patterns, every testimonial from people who learn to love differently, all of it transforms my biggest mistake into my greatest contribution. If this story showed you that our worst failures can become our most valuable lessons, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories about transformation, redemption, and building purpose from pain. Drop a comment about a time failure taught you something success never could. Because sometimes losing everything is how we learn what really matters, and sometimes the people we hurt most become the ones we're best equipped to help. Catch you in the next story.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoy watching Karma, Payback, come full circle every week, we dive into tales of betrayal and poetic justice. Don't miss the next one. Tap the subscribe button and join the Revenge Squad.